to welcome all of you. I want to thank the speakers for coming and sharing their expertise with us today. Thank you for coming online. And now what we're going to do, just to explain the time management of the session to you. We're going to have an introductory talk by each speaker. So unfortunately, it's going to be short. So we're going to say like 5 minutes each, if that's okay with each of you. And then we're going to have questions and discussion for about, I would say, 13 minutes. And then after that, we'll have questions from the audience. I'm going to try to keep it to my Robin as best as I can. Try, okay. But of course, we want you to engage and to ask questions and to feel welcome to do so. So I'm going to start. Perhaps we can start with Lily, if that's okay.
Lily, so you can make a statement. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues. Greetings from Pretoria, South Africa. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to join you all in this very interesting roundtable discussion. I would have really liked to be there with you in in Switzerland, but unfortunately I was not able to attend, but happy to be joining you virtually and looking forward to the discussions. Over to you, Jasmine. Did you want me to start, or that was just an introduction?
Hi, Lily, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. If you could just tell us a little bit about your experiences in migration governance in your work context, in your work in Africa, which actors and role players you've worked with, what you're currently working on.
Okay, thank you very much, Jasmine. Colleagues, so when we look at the case of South Africa, and one of the things that we take note is migration is a very topical issue in South Africa, and it's an issue that is greatly debated. And this is mainly because migration really is tied to the history of South Africa. And when we check what is going on in South Africa, it is the largest economy, the largest diversified economy in the region. It attracts a significant number of migrants from different parts of the continent and the world. And of course, some of the drivers of migration into South Africa are premised on that fact. It is the greatest, it is a developed economy. It has opportunities for education, better quality of life. And obviously, again, the migration there has been fueled by the good transportation system that exists there. And also the other thing then that is important to note when it comes to the discourse around migration in South Africa, that despite it being the most developed economy on the continent, it also grapples with other issues around unemployment. We talk about triple crisis when we look at South Africa: unemployment, poverty, inequality. So that to a large extent has framed the discussion around migration governance in the continent, in South Africa. Previously, migration was looked at from a perspective of labor migration, having migrants coming from the neighboring countries to work in the mines, to work in the agricultural sector. And then, of course, this has continued also to be fueled by refugees who come to South Africa looking for opportunities as well. Fleeing conflicts in their country. And then ultimately, because of economic challenges in the region, we also to seek for better opportunities. And because of all this context that I'm talking about, so I'm talking about mixed migration flows into South Africa, also people who are documented, and sometimes people who are undocumented, and then mixing it with the issue around unemployment. The existing narrative of migration in South Africa has changed in the recent past to be looked at as migration contributing to social economic challenges in the country, whether it is around unemployment for South Africa, and whether it's around poor service delivery with regards either to public housing, health, and education. So obviously, because of that, we find that we've also witnessed anti-foreigner sentiments arising in South Africa. And then as a result of that, the government has tried to come up with different policies to try and address this. South Africa has a white paper on international migration, which is used to try and address migration issues in the country. To address issues around xenophobia, anti-migrant sentiments, issues around racial discrimination and racism, the government of South Africa has developed a national action plan, which tries to address issues around racism, xenophobia, and related intolerances. Of course, this policy was informed after the World Conference Against Racism that was hosted in South Africa. And then most recently, to address the issue around unemployment, the government of South Africa has a draft national labor migration policy that is under discussion. Basically, what South Africa does when they develop policy frameworks is to ensure that we have consultation or participation within the communities to make sure that people are providing input on the document. So this is the document that is currently under discussion. And the main reason really for the national policy, labor migration policy, is to try and address the issues around unemployment. The government has come up with a list of critical skills that would frame the discourse around the kind of labor skills or specialized skills that the country needs. And ultimately, it is envisaged that once we have this document endorsed by cabinet, it will be able to give clarity in terms of what skill sets are needed in the country to be able to also address the issues around xenophobia. And basically, when you look at it, if I was just to summarize what that policy, this draft labor policy, it tends to do is, one, to try and address the population's expectations regarding accessibility to work for South Africans, given worsening unemployment and a perception that undocumented foreigners are distorting the labor markets. Then the second one is really to match the South Africans' labor market needs, in particular the needs for critical skills not locally available. The third part of that labor migration policy really is around the protection of migrant workers and their families in accordance with the international standards and guidelines. And finally, to look at the regional integration and cooperation imperatives. This obviously is also aligned to the African Union Agenda 2063. It is also aligned to the South African Development Cooperation. South Africa is part of SADC, so the South African Development Cooperation also has their own policy in terms of managing migration within the region, but mostly the continental framework that talks the African Continental Free Trade Area that acknowledges the fact that within the continent, we should be able to have labor moving freely and also services, but of course in an organized manner. And then, of course, ultimately, it's important to note that South Africa has also established what we call a border management agency, which came into being at the beginning of April. And the whole idea is to bring an integrated way of managing migration, bringing all the different government departments that are involved in managing administration and entry of migrants or exit of immigrants into the country. So I would just like to take a pause here, and then I will hand over back to Jasmine.
Can you hear me? Yes. Nene, for your interesting synopsis. And we're now going to pass on to Ernest, who will speak more about his research.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me to this conference. It's a delight to be here with all. I prepared a paper and I won't go into it. So like you, Lawrence, on the paper, so I'm not going to do it, but I'll touch a little bit on some aspects of it because I did respond to some of the questions, but also some of the ideas that I have in the work that I've been doing, in my colleagues have been doing in South Africa at the University of Kwazulu-Natal. So most of my work has been around integration and settlement of, and forgive me if for some of us were very sensitive about language, but just going to put a disclaimer there. I'm going to say some words that might perhaps be outdated at this point, but newcomers, particularly policy implications. I teach and supervise in the master's and in the master's program, PhD students and postdoctoral students in the area of migration in all its complexity. So I pretty much don't differentiate where and what. My areas of research are vast in health, in development, the sociologist by training, and et cetera. But I have developed a research agenda on vulnerability and agency. And this is what my work has been focusing on quite lately, particularly using by virtue of methods, quantitative approaches as they relate to disparities in terms of access to health, poverty, issues around poverty, education access, and employment. And I've also done comparative studies within countries in Canada, South Africa, Brazil, and Mozambique, and looking at a plethora of issues because my approach is that you cannot look at migration as an isolated phenomenon, but it's interrelated with quite a number of issues particularly around migration patterns, demography of migration and refugee communities. As a mixed methodologist, I find using a variety of tools very useful to not only to understand, but also to unpack what's going on, because part of us of what we do is to really find out what's really going on as researchers. But also I find it unlimiting that we can have all these tools available to us. I was quite intrigued by yesterday's presentation, keynote presentation, and I was quite excited to see the kind of work that's happening here in Europe. This kind of work for me requires us to open our minds, open our hearts, but also both and also understand different approaches, both theoretically and methodologically. So we're currently conducting a number of research in the area of migration that stems from my previous work. But I also run a school with a number of researchers who are doing quite a number of studies that have contributed extensively on ways to better manage migration, particularly using the variety of disciplines. And we're trying to be as interdisciplinary as possible. We have architects, we have housing, people who are doing work in social housing, we have people who are city and regional planners, we have community development practitioners, we have development, but also we have demographers and population studies academics who are pushing the agenda around the new urbanism and planning around cities and smart cities and inclusive cities and all of those kind of stuff. And that's the area in which the school and the researchers in the school have been doing their work. I'm just going to plug one book that came out amongst many. And in addition to what we have done, I think the most recent book that I have collaborated on with colleagues in the school was published in 2018. It's titled Crisis, Identity and Migration in Post-Colonial Southern Africa. And the approach that we took there was to look at the regional sense around looking at South Africa not only as an entity of its own, because sometimes that's what usually happens. You know, if you look at the whole system theory, you have the core and the periphery and everybody else. But for us, we felt that we need to debunk that approach to say that the South African economy, as my colleague mentioned, has always been about migration and labor migration, etc. So in that book, we actually talk a little bit, a number of articles that are talking about how we can't, if we want to understand integration and manage migration effectively, we cannot do it alone in South Africa. We have to look at other countries. So the newest book was published by one of my colleagues and the students. It's called The Anatomy of Inclusive Cities: Insights into Migrants in Selected Capital Cities of Southern Africa. And this is by Woodledge, and I can make this available. But in that volume, quite a number of articles give you a deeper understanding of what's really happening around the region, but also looking at city studies, looking at how migration in South Africa, but also in the region of Southern Africa is happening, looking at the lens of the city. A number of other colleagues have published on migration with their students. The work also that I have done, looking at kind of impacting what my colleague Lee was talking about was done in 2013, 2014, where a group of us from the Human Science Research Council at the time, I was the chief research specialist there at the Human Science Research Council of South Africa. We looked at a government-funded Sanya state of immigration in South Africa. And in that study, obviously, we were commissioned by the Department of Home Affairs to do quite a number of, to understand quite a bit about migration-related legislative and policy and also operational frameworks in South Africa and the stated regions. We did an analysis of internal data from the Department of Home Affairs, but also relevant external information to produce profiles of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in South Africa over the last decade, which was in 2014. In this study, we interviewed officials working for the Department of Home Affairs, working in the immigration area, as well as the department with the department interagency partners and stakeholders. We also we examined instruments for migration management tracking systems that were happening there, and with the understanding of developing and really try to understand the policy and management issues considered. Legal frameworks, policies, institutional frameworks, initiatives that are happening in certain types of immigrants, etc., etc. So that has been the focus of my work. Today, and as Lily mentioned, I think a small but significant amount of work has been done, taken by the government to really do the work that they have done, for example, the development of the white paper and the draft policy on migration policy. So that's where I will stop for now. Talk a lot.
Thank you so much for that. Sanya, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Leiza. If you may, Leiza, we would like to tell us about your experiences in migration governance and her work that she's done. Thank you.
Cool. I will try to keep track of my time. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this kind of invitation. Very happy to be here, but especially to see a growing interest in other regions of the world and having more global visions and understandings of migration governance and migration studies, despite all the challenges that were brilliantly addressed yesterday by my friend Lorenzo. But I think that spaces like this one show that effectively there are more and growing spaces to bring in perspectives from Southern countries. So my first disclaimer, and I usually do this disclaimer, is that I'm an international relations analyst. And this means that my units of analysis are very broad. So when I say region, I'm not saying subnational regions, I'm talking about macro regions. So when I say region, I say South America as a region, Europe, Africa, Asia, okay? So that's a region for me. That said, I will talk about Brazil's distinctiveness, South American regional migration governance. And South American regional migration governance is particularly distinctive because of its liberal and progressive normative frameworks and discourses. And I'm sorry to those of you who have already heard this point at the Miss Call last week, because I already made it and seeing the faces here laughing about that. No, but that's the only thing that I will mention, one or two ideas that I mentioned last week. However, my point here is Brazil's contribution to the development of these liberal and progressive normative framework and approaches to migration in South America, despite all implementation gaps, which are curiously different from the ones from the one that was mentioned, the gap that was mentioned yesterday by Matthias in his keynote, that he mentioned that there is a gap, which is a gap that is usually addressed in the literature, between restrictive policies and more open or progressive implementation on the ground. Well, in South America, it's actually the opposite. There are very open and liberal and progressive policies and discourses, and a more restrictive implementation on the ground, with many differences between countries, subnational units, but that's more or less the situation. And Brazil, well, what's the role of Brazil in all these particularly open and progressive regional approaches to migration? Well, Brazil made many contributions to this. First of all, because it's a regional power, and we all know that in terms of material terms, but also in soft power terms. But some of the examples of Brazil's contribution to South American regional migration governance are, first of all, the 1997 refugee law that was a pioneer law at the global level, but especially at the regional level. I was taken as an example by many other countries in South America, and Paulo can further develop that. And well, because he's a UNHCR official in Brazil, high-level official, so he can talk about that much better than me. And second point is the policy liberalization that Brazil went through. And policy liberalization in Brazil happened through different means. It wasn't only via legislative liberalization. It happened also via bureaucratic and institutional practices. Some examples are the Conselho Nacional de Migração, the National Council for Migration, of which he was a key actor, actually, and I interviewed him like 3 or 4 lives ago when I made the research for my PhD thesis. Great interview, by the way. So this Conselho Nacional de Migração now it's more complex now, but it was a key institution for this liberalization. So when Brazil had a new constitution in the late 1980s, plus coexisted with a very restrictive national law for migration inherited from the dictatorship, this council was the one in charge of issuing lower level legislation that was very progressive, so that it would help Brazil in opening up and getting updated, its national policies updated, and keeping track of the changes that the country experienced in terms of migration flows, because its legislation was very restrictive and wasn't able to keep up with those changes. The second then was jurisprudence that actually opened up and expanded the set of rights to which migrants could have access to, and the bureaucratic practices in general. How did Brazil actually materialize this policy liberalization through different means, legislative and bureaucratic practices? Well, my point is because Brazil has something very distinctive, which is a very wide participation of different governance actors. Civil society, academia, different branches of civil society, different branches of government in different bureaucratic instances and institutions. One of the examples is the SNE, the National Council of Migration, but also the National Council for Refugees, the elaboration of the 2017 migration law, which is a very progressive law and was a product of a broad consensus among a broad range of actors. Or more recently, Operation Shelter, or Operation Welcome, depends on the translation, Operação Acolhida, which is a massive operation involving many government, non-government actors, and UN institutions at the border between Brazil and Venezuela to host and receive Venezuelan migrants coming from, passing through the border to Roraima. The outcome of this very broad participation is the development, the creation, the development, or the embracement of some core South American regional principles for migration governance. The example, regularization as a solution to regularity, which I mentioned in this. So whenever South American policymakers think about solutions or responses to big numbers of people in a regular situation, they say, okay, how do we solve this? By giving them documents, not by stopping them at the border or deporting or addressing the root causes, but by regularizing them. And that's something that has been a constant among policymaking on migration in Brazil. And I want to give you some specific examples, and I think I will finish with that, and then I can further develop in the Q&A. But to give you a very concrete idea of what I'm talking about, the 2017 law of Brazil in its Article 4 states the following principles: universality, indivisibility, and interdependence of human rights. non-discrimination and xenophobia, promotion of regular entry and regularization, equal access to public services independent of nationality and legal status, international cooperation aimed at protecting and promoting human rights, repudiation of collective deportations. All these things are stated in the 2017 migration law of Brazil, and I'll leave it there, and I can further expand on this in Q&A.
Great, thank you so much for your contribution. And we have Paulo who's going to tell us about his vast experience since the interview you had many years ago. So we look forward to hearing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I'm very glad to share with you our experience and how Brazil changed its political approach for migration. And just one opening remark, that is, I'm not talking on behalf of UNHCR. I'm talking my personal experience, because before being UNHCR officer, I was working for the government as head of the National Immigration Council. So I will talk with you about my experience being in the government. So, as I think Leiza already gave you a very comprehensive and accurate analysis of what's happening in Brazil, but I would like just to put light or shed light on the impacts of some more intensive flows had on the elaboration of the new migratory law in Brazil. So back in 2007, we are trying to provide a more progressive, open context for migrants in Brazil, opening more doors for them to easily come to Brazil, but also in supporting the ones already in Brazil to access documents. So we put forward some progressive measures, trying to change this environment, despite of the law at the time was a very restrictive one, but we are using the powers of the National Immigration Council to open some space. But in this scenario, in the aftermath of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, we started to receive a number of Haitians crossing the land border to Brazil. So this was an important moment for us, because it caught the attention of the Brazilian society for the migration phenomenon, and how we can address the Haitians that are arriving using the current tools we had in that moment. So, and the response we tried to put in place was somehow innovative, because we created a new visa, the humanitarian visa. It was a new approach, in order to receive Haitians in Brazil in a regular manner, without them to have to cross to the land border and come to Brazil without documents, and etc. etc. So, and this the creation of the humanitarian visa, and also an agreement that we had with the CONARE, the two organizations working together, when de facto we created a documentation procedure, because whenever CONARE is going to reject a request, an asylum claim for Haitians, instead of putting that person undocumented in the country, CONARE refer or channel the asylum claim for CENIG and CENIG received as a migration request, a residence request. And so we managed to receive in 2 years around 100,000 Haitians Well, the vast majority of them fully documented in the country. So, and then this led to a public mobilization, and this public mobilization, I think, gave the push we need for for the approval of the new migration law. It's a law that has long discussions in the country, and the event of the arrival of Haitians, I think, gave us the context for the law to go ahead in the Congress and finally be approved. So, and also this Haitian humanitarian response was also very important experience for the government, for many organizations in Brazil, and somehow prepared the ground for the humanitarian response that the Brazilian government put in place to receive Venezuelans like 7 years later in 2017. So, and yeah, to lead with the Venezuelan influx, the government put in place also a migratory complementary pathway. So Venezuelans, when Venezuelans are in Brazil, across the border to Brazil, they have two options, being asylum seekers or requests for a temporary residence. So the policy was to full document everyone that are coming to Brazil. And also the government established this welcome operation. It's a very interesting operation led by the Brazilian government, but has many other civil society, international, and other organizations that joined the government to put in place major response for the Venezuelan influence, including facilitating access to territory, access to documentation, provision of humanitarian assistance, access to shelter, to food, to basic needs. And one important element that is the voluntary internal relocation program that is forced whenever Venezuela wants to go to other parts of the country. The government puts in place a scheme supporting them to voluntarily relocate from the border area to a number of different cities across the Brazilian territory, and this could alleviate public services, like health, education in the border area, and also provide them better prospects for integration in other parts of the country. So more than 200,000 Venezuelans were admitted basically in 2 years, 2017, 2018, as asylum seekers or migrants. Now we have more than 500,000 Venezuelans in Brazil, and more than 100,000 were voluntarily relocated from the border to other parts of the country. So, this was a very important response, because this alleviate the pressure over the area of the border and to host communities that live in the border area. So despite the Venezuelan situation is still a going on situation in Brazil, we continue to receive Venezuelans, but the legacy of both events are very clear. I mean, the arrival of Haitians tested the policy that the National Immigration Council had put in place before, and this policy was maintained, and in the end, it led to the approval of the migration law with the same openness, progressive spirit. A new humanitarian visa was created at that time, and then this visa was incorporated in the new migration law. And now the humanitarian visa was recently used for to receive Afghans and Ukrainians in the Brazilian territory, and they can, after entering the territory, ask for asylum or other forms of documentation in the country. So, and also the response for Haitians shaped the way the Brazilian government prepared the response, the humanitarian response for Venezuelans, which resulted in the Operation Bar Contact is, we think, a very important element in the current policies that are in place. For now, that's it for this editing.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to ask some questions. So I'm going to aim to have about 20 minutes questions, and the rest is audience questions from you. So I'm just going to touch on 4 questions, not all of them. So I'm just going to pick up on what Paulo was speaking about. So, and then of course, each of you can have comments to the questions. It's meant to be a discussion. So when you talk about large migration inflows, as you've mentioned, from Haiti and Venezuela and Brazil, but also in South Africa, from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Somalia, and Congo, how did these inflows of migrants influence policy making, and as well as the public perceptions regarding these migrants and refugees? So I know you spoke about some of the pilots. I don't know if you would like to add or South African comments as well, please. So you're welcome.
Well, thank you. Perhaps Brazil has a very specific context because it's like a continent, so it's a very big country with a very large population, and basically Brazil is formed by immigrants. So it's immigration is in our DNA. So this has a weight when people discuss and talk about immigrants in Brazil. But with the Haitians, there were a very large mobilization, and I would like to stress the importance of the media, because the media gave large visibility for the migration influx, but they had a solidarity approach in this visibility. So people are fleeing from earthquake, people lose everything in Haiti, people do not have food, not have where to search for help. So they need to go to other, to ask for protection in other parts, in other countries. So this discuss attract solidarity from the Brazilian population, but so this solidarity approach was predominant, and this led to impulse for people to try to move forward with the approval of the new migration law. Of course, it was a specific moment of Brazil. At that time, we were passing through a boom of investments in preparation of the large events. It was in 2012. So the FIFA Football Cup, World Cup, the Olympic Games. So there are many construction services in place around the country. So there was somehow a manpower shortage, and Haitians also benefited of this moment and were, hired by companies that want to have manpower to work in this major event. So it was a positive moment, and because of this, in the way the Haitian flow was, the approach the society and the media put, the Haitian influence was important to push policymakers to design and improve the law.
Can you hear me? Okay. So are there any other comments?
Yeah, I would like to highlight something that I don't know if you pay attention that he said. He said, about the Brazilian response to Venezuelan immigration, Venezuelan large-scale displacement. He said, Venezuelans, when they cross the border, have two options. They can apply for refugee status or they can apply for migratory status. They can apply for one or the other one, independent from the reasons why they left the country. Does it sound to you? Yeah, I mean, there are some, but we are very used to, especially in global north countries, a very sharp distinction between migrants and refugees. Such a sharp distinction is not the case in South America. It works differently. And you also said the policy was to document everyone. That was policy, to document everyone, to find venues for regularization, which is a constant among South American regional governance. And I would like to highlight regarding Venezuelan, the response of Venezuelan large scale displacement in Brazil. 3 points in Brazilian immigration governance. First of all, Brazilian bureaucracy, what I was just mentioning before. Brazil is a country that provided more regularization, that regularized more people, more Venezuelans in all over South America because of this policy and also because of its bureaucratic capacities, because of the bureaucrats that are part of Brazilian migration governance. And yesterday we were discussing how critical Brazilians are of their own country, but actually Brazil is the country that regularizes most Venezuelans in the region with all its problems and shortcomings. There is some legitimacy and credibility within Brazilian bureaucracy. Second one is importance of foreign policy. This policy was adopted by Khalema and then by Bolzano, far-right politician, regularizing displaced people, which can sound somehow paradoxical, right? But this has to do with a conscious decision by the Bolsonaro government in very strong opposition to the Maduro regime, to the Venezuelan regime, and in close cooperation with the US that funded some aspects of Operación Shelter at the border. And again, with the participation of a broad range of actors. I also think that the Brazilian response to Venezuelan displacement shows the resilience, or the selective resilience of the South American approach to immigration governance.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to the South African side, Ernest.
Yeah, I'm just going to touch on a few points, and I'll try to be brief. But I would also just to comment Brazil for their approach, because in South Africa we did take that approach. We actually adopted pretty much the similar approaches of looking at differentiating between refugees and the other migrant category. So, but the governments in the continent organize migrants and refugees as security threats, and we just have to acknowledge that in a way. But key issues that I want to highlight that ventilate temporary migration in South Africa. One is the irregular migration, and I'll just list them and then maybe just briefly say a little bit about them as a way to show how management and governance of migration has happened in South Africa. And perhaps my colleague maybe can elaborate further. So with irregular migration, obviously we know that South Africa is a destination and transit point for irregular migrants, asylum seekers, and economic migrants. And some of the terminology is very troubling. But on the continent, Africans account for example, 14.5% of international migrants, with 10 million moving within Sub-Saharan African region, including Southern Africa. So when we look at the reports that were done by the International Federation for Human Rights reports, that South Africa increasingly holds irregular migrants from Zimbabwe, and more distant countries such as Republic of Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and Somalia, As of 2017, an estimated 2 million foreign-born migrants of working age between 50 and 64 were living in South Africa, presenting 5.3% of the South African labor force. Between 2012 and 2017, there was a 1.4% increase in international migrants of working age in South Africa. And I have all these statistics, and I'm happy to share with all of you in terms of who's moving, the duration, and where they're moving in the country and why they're moving, etc., etc. In terms of refugee protection and its management, we need to ask ourselves, why did South Africa, how did South Africa get to having a relatively high number of migrants, asylum seekers and refugees? So South Africa's commitment through South African Refugees Act provides that right for asylum seekers and refugee work for refugees to start and work in South Africa, to access medical services, life-saving treatment, and freedom of movement, has made the country an attractive destination for people fleeing crisis and other in their home countries, and in quest for a more dignifying and humane experience. In terms of the refugee, South Africa's Refugee Act, it has done quite a lot in terms of assisting with all its frameworks to give refugees and asylum seekers a space to grow and to flourish in South Africa. Wanted to talk also about economic disparity. South Africa, as you all know, is characterized by significant economic inequalities. And this gets to the contextual issues within South Africa, high levels of poverty, unemployment, and this has really impacted how migration is managed in South Africa. Some would say that it has led to government adopting quite contradictory approaches to how they manage migration within the changing policies. That rules of the country is led by government adopting and frequently changing policies in many ways. And I think this goes to what we heard yesterday from our keynote around the issue of, I can't remember the term, but epistemic something. Yes. So I had to reflect on that last night just to see what is really happening. But regrettably, there's an issue of xenophobia in South Africa that has taken quite a really interesting phenomenon and element. And I'm sure it happens everywhere. But in South Africa, it's quite troubling, given the history of the country and given everybody was marveled by the release of Nelson Mandela and the promise of democracy and what we had to go through. But then there's xenophobic attacks that are periodic and mainly frequent, depending on what's happening in the country, politically, economically, socially, has really impacted the manner in which the discourse around migration is handled and it's packaged within the social media or also within the media. So, but it has taken a very anthropophobic element, which is quite troubling. I'm not sure if this is happening in Brazil with Asian, etc. But in South Africa, according to what a number of scholars have pointed, that the xenophobia is not necessarily xenophobic sentiments against other folks coming, Chinese immigrants, etc., African American immigrants, which is very troubling in an African country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know if we want to comment about Lily. Lily, if you have any comments that you'd like to add to what?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I would like to add some comments, particularly on the point around the refugee. When we look at the policies that are used to manage migrants and refugees. South Africa, as has been mentioned by Ernest, has a clear Immigration Act, which manages refugees in the country. And of course, one thing that is very unique about South Africa in comparison to some of the neighboring countries in the region is that South Africa does not have an encampment policy. So you'll find that in some of the countries in the region, maybe Malawi, Zambia, refugees stay in a camp. Whilst in South Africa, once refugees come into the country, their constitution allows them, the Refugee Act allows the refugees to be able to work and live in South Africa and access all the services that South Africans access, of course, with the exception of them not being able to vote. So that is just one distinction. The other distinction I also want to point out, when you look at the case of South Africa, when it comes to dealing with migrants and vis-a-vis refugees, in around 2000, in the early 2000s, going on to 2005, when the economic situations in some of the neighboring countries really deteriorated, particularly in Zimbabwe, we had a significant number of Zimbabweans coming into South Africa looking for opportunities. And to try and ensure that the pipeline for refugees was not blocked, the government of South Africa came up with special permits to address the flows of migrants coming into South Africa. So in South Africa, we have what we call the Zimbabwe special permits that were given to the Zimbabwe nationals to be able to come into the country to work and stay in a regular manner. The other special permit that we can also refer to when we are talking about South Africa is the Lesotho special permit. There was also the Angola special permit. So these are different ways that the government of South Africa has put in different policy measures to address the different context when it comes to managing population flows across the border. Of course, I already mentioned the white paper on migration, which is also important. And then the government also has what we call different special permits or critical skills permits that also allow people to come into the country. I think the important point to note about South Africa when we are talking about migration policies is to highlight the fact that the conversation around the migration policy space in South Africa has evolved depending on the context to address the changing political, economic, and social contexts. In my first submission, I didn't really go back to the different policies that have been there in the past, like during the apartheid era, the transition to democracy, and so forth and so forth. What has happened in South Africa is that the government has tried to look at ways of changing the policy, the migration landscape, to address the social context. And of course, the final point that I would also like to highlight is the one around regional integration, and which obviously the two cases that I gave of the Zimbabwe special permit and the Lesotho special permit speak to that, opening the space to allow the SADC member states to also come into the country in a regular way. Over.
Actually, two more if we have time, let's see. The first one is speaking about the impact of crises in terms of migration governance, as well as the key challenges that we face in South Africa in response to migration. So, crises management. Okay, so you've got no comments in that? Okay. Okay, we go on to the last question. Do you think that migration-dedicated international organizations and research institutions still have a Western European bias or biases? If so, what can be done? So is there anyone that would like to begin?
I think yesterday we tried to ventilate what that could mean in most southern countries, but I think in South Africa in particular, the discourse on migration is a very contentious space. And I think the research that's going on right now is quite unique. It could fit in with the best of the best in the world in terms of the institutes that are happening, but I have a critique of some of the researchers being progressed, and also it's issues of politics as well that are somehow coming in the background around approaches and affiliations and all of those kind of things that we need to really be wary of. People use migration like any other social issue for their own political gains, and we have to. That's why science is so important, and that's why doing this work is very important, so that we can dispel some of the discourses that have emerged, that are emerging and evolving and just circulating around. South Africa government has two options, I think. It is a way forward to continue with the law and order approach of managing migration, which I think contributes to xenophobia. I think, I might be wrong, colleagues can correct me on that. Or alternatively, the country would adopt a more sensitive human rights approach, which takes cognizance of creative ways, and we have to learn from what other countries are doing. It's not a matter of this is the West or the global. Of course, the decolonial critique is very necessary in understanding migration. You cannot understand the context without unpacking it from its roots. But I think creative ways in which migrants, for example, contribute to the local economy. There needs to be more research on how migrants and locals are actually making a way for themselves together within the country. Research that would focus on that would be very, very impactful, because all we hear is that it's on all sides the negative. But I think there's an opportunity there, but also to also understand how to enhance regional cooperation and integration, as my colleague mentioned. I think it's a way to go, particularly on issues of migration, and also to understand that migration in South Africa is also part and parcel of what's happening in the globe, right? So that globalist approach or analysis is also very, very important to understanding that part. Thank you.
Any other comments? Any other comments? Lily, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would like to comment just a little bit again to add on to what Ernest has said with regards to the case of South Africa. Indeed, migration can be and has been looked at in a contentious manner in South Africa. But again, at the same time, the government acknowledges that migration does contribute to development, and it's clearly indicated in the white paper on international migration and on the recent draft labor migration policy that is in the process of being finalized. And one of the things that the government of South Africa has requested clearly to the International Organization for Migration, I mean the agency I work for, is for us to support them with the benchmarking. South Africa is looking at countries that have a similar kind of economy that they do, to see how they can also learn from them. So just in terms of countries that have managed in migration that brings in skills, looking at different bilateral agreements that countries have entered into, benchmarking with countries also on the continent, benchmarking with countries in Europe and in Asia. So that is one of the things that the government of South Africa is very keen to do. Then when it comes to the area around evidence, because we say that the policy must be evidence-based, it must be informed by facts. The statistics South Africa, with the other departments of government, have established on what we call a migration forum. And the whole idea is also to ensure that the discourse around migration is informed by numbers. The government is coming up with a migration profile, whereby they link this to the different surveys that are conducted by the Stats SA. So just to stress the fact that the government of South Africa is really acknowledging the need to also learn from other countries that are similar or are in similar situations that they are in, to address migration.
Any comments here?
Thank you. Just one point related to the previous discussions, just to clarify. The Venezuelan influx is considered mixed flow. So by the government, by the United Nations, we have an interagency platform, the FOD, which is coordinated by UNHCR and IOM. So the idea from the Brazilian government is when the people come to Brazil, they have to take an informed decision. So they are presented with the possibilities, and if the person consider, oh, I'm a refugee, I will apply for or put as a plan. But if I'm not considered a refugee, I will go through the migration way. So that is the approach the Brazilian government use. So in our case, perhaps one fragility we have is the absence of a national policy for migrants, refugees, and stateless persons, which is a provision of the current migration law, but was not approved by the former administration. So this new administration that took office this year has already took steps for the approval of this national policy, because one fragility we have is the integration, the socio-economic integration. We have great laws, we have great principles, but when it comes to the real integration, there is a gap. So in this gap is because we don't have a clear policy for to sustain this local integration. So this, hopefully we will have this new policy approved by this year. We are mobilizing, the government is mobilizing the migrants and refugee communities, the host community also, in order to put in place this and approve this policy, the local integration policy. And one important issue is also the evidence, which my colleague from Ireland has said. In Brazil, we have this international migration observatory that it was created back 10 years ago, and which has, together with a number of universities, researchers in Brazil, has gave many support, also for the support, the evidence support for all of us to know better the real context, the actual context of migration, refugee in Brazil. And one last mention is related to what my colleague said about also evidence of the contribution of migrants and refugees to the host community. Because there is, as you know, there is some people that say that they are burden for the country is spending lots of money to host and to support people in the territory. And we had a research with the World Bank and that tried to understand the economic impact of the Venezuelan influx to the border area. So, and this research was very interesting because one aspect of one aspect of these impacts was the economic growth much over the other states of the region, much over the average of the Brazilian states. So the Roraima state, which is the state that is receiving Venezuela, are growing much higher than the other states in the region. It is connected to the arrival of the new arrivals, and also the diversification of the economy, raise in tax collection. So there are many information that sustain that the Venezuelans are actually contributing to the whole community and the development of the whole region, and not only people that are coming to use the health and education and the public system. So I think this had a very large dissemination in the country, so it gave us grounds to better understand the phenomenon and from all the dimensions in terms of impacts in the host communities.
Thank you so much for the comments. I would like to open up to the floor now and use them one short comment. Okay,
very short. I would like, well, regarding the last question on Western centric concepts and theories, I would like to highlight again that Brazil, as a distinctly South American case with its own concepts, own policies, are very much context specific to South America. And we can see that there are some ideas that are maybe mainstream, but do not really make much sense in that context. High skill, low skill, push-pull factors, externalization, representations, or even the decision to finance refugees. There is an enormous debate on that. We can leave it maybe for another time or for coffee. But what it really shows is that we can think about migration in ways in which we have to be context specific, and I'm very highly in favor of regional approaches to this in terms of theories and concepts.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to open to the floor. You can direct the questions in the panel or just any general comments you have.
Many questions. Thank you very much to everyone. I have two questions. My first question is to Lily. You said that migration impacts jobs and social structures for services in South Africa. My question is, are there significant evidence to prove this, or if it's just based on bias? My second question is for Ernest. Are there different policies that you can see that directly impact this anti or xenophobic policy in South Africa?
I collect the questions.
Thank you, Nene and Nene. Mine is a comment to your presentation. I see South Africa is, well, I'm commenting it from, I'm a scholar from Zimbabwe, and I did study a little bit of the caveats of xenophobia in South Africa. And I feel pity for South Africa because it's a recipient of so many immigrants from the region. And this is due to the fact that we are historically, and like the point that we mentioned, that it can migration to South Africa can be understood from the historical context. And for sure, we are historically, culturally interlinked, Zimbabwe and South Africa. And that's why most Zimbabweans find it easy to cross the border and come and work in your country. But my biggest challenge when it comes to the South African government in terms of governing migration comes on the how politically it is how politically this whole issue of migration is linked. So for instance, you have mentioned that the South African government makes available special permits, and also you mentioned the issue of Afrophobia and xenophobia. I think these are responses to the consequences of migration in South Africa. But the South African government is not addressing the root cause of why Zimbabweans are moving to South Africa. For instance, this comes to an issue of the position, ideological position. ANC, it shares a background with the ruling party in Zimbabwe. And instead of helping Zimbabweans to solve their economic problems, they join the narrative against the colonial legacy. They join the narrative against to blame the sanctions for the reasons why Zimbabwe's economy is dilapidating. But however, as Zimbabweans, we know for sure that the issue in Zimbabwe is an issue of poor governance. It's an issue of continuous bad governance policies that are happening, and also that is derived from other governance issues like poor elections which are rigged, poor election governance, which is something that we always think as Zimbabwe that ANC as a regional or South African government as a regional leader in Southern Africa, they have to stand a position of ensuring that Zimbabwe at least there's clear and fair elections, and so that there's a transition to better governance.
One last question.
Thank you. I will pose the question. Probably you won't have time to answer, but it's not too bad for answer, but so we can discuss this during the afternoon on other opportunities. My name is Jasmine. I'm a sociologist from Brazil. And I'm happy, thank you for this kind of table, this round table with different types of professionals. We can hear the experience of the bureaucrats and research in the Global South. And I was wondering if it would be nice to have also representatives of the immigration community, such as Venezuelans, Asians, and Zimbabweans, to offer a contrast of the creation of the liberal framework and the lived experience of this framework. But in such two unequal societies. And so my question is totally aligned with my previous colleague in terms that we have two countries with a similarity, which is the resilience of inequality and the role played by race in this inequality. And we didn't talk about this in the talk today. So the question is, based on your experience of creating this framework or researching this based on the finds, how do race relations in each country shape this migration government, this liberal framework, or these specific policies to access services? So I think I went not highlighting a contrast between Global South and Europe, but similarity, which is the silence of race. It seems for me that there is a colorblind perspective in the immigration governance, and how does it impact the immigration policies? That's it.
This microphone seems to be very troublesome today. But let's just give our speakers a chance to reply. How much time do we have?
We need to be short. I'm hungry. So, 5 minutes.
Okay, I'd like to encourage all of you to have questions to the speakers during lunch or coffee or tea and just ask them your questions. So who would like to answer first? Okay, Ernest, yes.
I think there are no policies, so I'm just going to be like that. There are no policies and no public policies in South Africa. South Africa is that has done away with those restrictive kind of policies that restricts folks or that discriminates. So that would be that. But we know that there are issues of the colonial legacy that we still need to deal with. Let's leave politics to politicians. It's just we are researchers, but also political, right? So we can divorce ourselves from who we are, but then the work that we do must be research and science, and to inform and to get us moving towards a direction that is evidence-based, and I think that's what the South African government is trying to do. So I also agree with the regional politics. I had a long sentence about race. So I can talk to you about it, both in South Africa and in Brazil, and the silencing of it. Yes.
Okay, are there any other comments?
Well, I think the question about race is a very good one, because in Brazil we tend to hide or to not talk about racism, xenophobia. We tend to see the Brazilian society as a very open, welcoming, but we know that there are many situations of racism and xenophobia that we need to address, and people that are black has this double situation, because they face the Brazilian racism against our people that live in Brazil, and also the xenophobia. in some scale, the presence of this in Brazil. And well, I think we need some specific policies to address this situation. We see recently the government much more engaged in putting in place or reinforce policies against racism and to somehow mitigate the social differences, historical social differences based on race in Brazil. And one interesting element is the recent decision of the president of Khalema in Brazil that established prioritization or based on the color of the skin on the CONARE decision. So CONARE is prioritizing Black people when taking their decision, because historically CONARE always puts these people on side. And took long to take decisions in some situations. So I recognize we need to much more to move forward in more concrete policies and to understand the intersectionalities, being migrants, being Black, and access to public policy, for example. We tend to see migrants as a monolithic, but it's not. There are many differences and different access to rights and policies. So, but there are some initiatives that we see in a very good way in terms of prioritizing some actions in the agriculture.
Okay, thank you very much. Now our session unfortunately has to end. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here, for attending, and especially our esteemed speakers. We've learned so much from you, including Lily. Thank you so much for being online. And yeah, hopefully we get to eat lunch now. So thank you very much.
Bye bye, Lily.
Bye, colleagues. Ciao.
Bye.